Hello, welcome to another AMA in DeFi Dojo. Today it is April 18th, 2023, and we are joined by the Dolomite team. So here we have Ox, Maj, and Bobo. We have Adam, and I believe we're waiting for. There he is. No, we're
Oh,
waiting.
perfect timing.
Perfect, Corey. So now that we have the team here, if you guys don't know, Dolomite is a protocol that is yet another iteration of protocols built on top of GMX, but doing something a little bit different, a little bit nuanced, and maybe solving one of the problems that I have wanted to be solved related to GLP leverage for a very long time. So we're going to ask all about that and hopefully learn quite a bit during this AMA. Now, without further ado, I will allow the team to introduce themselves. Majin Bobo, why don't you go first?
Hey guys, I'm Bajin Bobo, or Chris, whatever you want to call me. I handle the business development side and growth for Dolomite. I've been into crypto since 2016. Bought a little project called Ant Shares that really changed my life and made me want to stay in the sphere. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Antshares, wasn't Antshares that project that came out of China in 2016, 2017?
Yeah, it went from Ant Shares to it's just a meme to Neo to oh my god, I have a bunch of different money.
That's right. Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. I remember that exploding back in like the early days of ETH. Cool. All right. Well, Adam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, hey, I'm Adam, co-founder of Dolomite. I originally got into crypto in 2013. Bitcoin, hit $1,000 for the first time, and programming forum I was on took some interest in it, and it was really early days. Like I would struggle to call anything then, even an altcoin. But it was nice to kind of explore the tech really early on, and from there just was in and out of the space. Had some interest, I don't know, maybe 2015, but 2017 is where it really took off. In January, I ended up stumbling into some tokens, and by September, things were really heating up with trading. And Corey and I had been at that point already working together for a few years, doing hackathons and side projects and everything else. We found we really worked well together, and we were both really building focused. We love developing, we love building, and it all just started to line up with crypto and trying to build in the space. And uh, January of that year, we really started to build in crypto. January of 2018, and kind of been doing it ever since. But we can get more into that later. I figured let's give Corey a chance to introduce himself.
Yeah, go ahead. That was a great introduction for Corey as well. Corey, why don't you lead
Thanks
right
for
after
that.
that?
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so taking the torch from there. So, Corey Kaplan, one of the two co-founders of Dolomite, also. First met Adam in college, as he mentioned, and in 2015 was my first actual entry into crypto, but not necessarily so crypto focused. At the time, I was building some game modding slash exploitation software, and one of the companies whose game we were modding didn't like what we were doing and essentially tattletaled on us to PayPal and shut us down. So we started taking Bitcoin for payment as a way to keep everything moving and still collect payment for the software that we were creating at the time. Um, as 2017 and 2018 rolled around, we started finding ourselves diving deeper and deeper into the very early on DEX space. This is before DeFi was DeFi. At the time, I think everyone was calling it open finance. It was really struggling to find its own. And at the time, there were a lot of exchanges that were going under left and right, so we found ourselves working on early DEX technology, namely something called Loopring, which today exists very differently now than where it was and what it was doing back then. It's still very focused on building very cool DEX technology. So we built the first DEX on top of Loopring in 2018 and continued to iterate on it and build it, flesh it out until about middle of 2021. At which point we decided to shut that down in favor of building this new product that we have today. Still called Dolomite, still underneath the same company, but very focused on solving different problems.
Yeah, I would say it's a pretty interesting origin story for the two of you. Um, being on the ground floor sort of in 2015 and then revisiting it at the what I would say like the birth of DeFi and sticking around from that. I know many people came in when Ethereum popped off and then left during the bear market and then came back when sort of DeFi had its rebirth. But if you stuck through it during then, you're pretty battle hardened. So let's talk about Dolomite. So what is Dolomite and what does it do?
But we look at Dolomite as a next generation money market platform. So it's able to offer simple over collateralized loans, margin trading using spot settlement, and it also has a decentralized trading built into it on the liquidity layer, which allows us to do two things really well. And these are the two things that we think are really unique about the platform. The first is capital efficiency, and the second is broad token support. So in terms of broad token support, because that's easier to dive into, we're able to work with a wide variety of assets and a large number of them. So when you look at most money market protocols today, most that offer like a more capital efficient centralized pooling typically cap off the number of assets they list between like 30 and 60. Going anywhere beyond that introduces a lot of risk from not just a economic risk perspective, but also an engineering risk. And one of the things that we were able to accomplish was introducing like new smart contract architecture that hadn't really been used yet in order to expand that number from that 30 to 60 to in the potential thousands. And of course, it'll take a long time to get there, but something that we're really excited about because we don't have to worry about the trends of tomorrow with new assets coming on board, clashing with the old trends for things we might have already listed or started to work with. And then looking at the capital efficiency side of things, our protocol introduces this concept of a virtual balance. We call it a Dolomite balance when you use the platform. That this Dolomite balance allows you to get access to all of our services using virtual liquidity. And one of the easiest ways to exemplify this concept is our GLP launch, which we can dive into soon after.
Yeah. Okay. So that's pretty interesting. From my perspective, just having had the Arbitrum airdrop, certainly having seen an Arbitrum solidly season, people going crazy about GMX for the past year. When I was introduced to Dolomite, it was as this protocol being built specifically to lever up GLP in nuanced and interesting ways. But now you're saying that this is potentially some interesting money market tech that's not just GMX specific. So would you categorize yourself as an additional layer on top of GMX, or are you something entirely different that happens to have something that works with like GLP and other assets?
Yeah, so this is a tough thing to overcome from a PR perspective. Like
Right.
working with the GMX ecosystem was a very clear like risk reward in terms of like the time required to build this, mixed with like the potential payoff because of how large the GLP market cap is, the collective community mindshare and whatnot. But then when you look at what we've done so far, it's very easy to get stuck in that uh, predisposition of just being a GMX offshoot. So we're looking at doing other integrations that clearly separate ourselves from that, and we'll showcase our money market protocols technology beyond just GLP with GMX. Yeah, one thing just to throw out there, if you're familiar with the Arbitrum ecosystem, is Camelot with
Mm-hmm.
you have these things called SP NFTs, special purpose NFTs. They are the representation of the boosted yield that you're earning by locking up your LP tokens, and our protocol can even work with them in a similar white glove manner to offer that boosted yield while allowing you to borrow against those SP NFTs in our platform. So we're looking at like other high value integrations that allow us to very quickly rebrand from any of this predisposition as being a GMX offshoot because we don't see ourselves as that whatsoever. But it was a really good launch pad for us to just get our name out there, flex our technology, while also getting better product market fit.
Okay, man. There's so many. That's really interesting. And now there are so many other questions I want to ask you, completely unrelated to the GLP launch. But let's see let's see if we can get to them by the end here. So, I want to walk through the protocol. Now, I can share my screen, or I can have one of you guys share your screen. Which would you prefer?
I think I'll share my screen. I just need one sec to get my screen ready with the like right stuff how I would do a demo for.
Yeah, sure. Take your time. No rush. Uh, in the meantime, let's think about like you just said that you have these effectively financial NFTs or NFTs representing your locked position on Camelot. There are many such dexes on Arbitrum, and the one of the questions has always been if you allow for NFTs to be collateral, because we've seen a few protocols try this, especially with like the JPEG NFTs. Don't you run the risk of bad debt because they aren't incredibly liquid?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility depending on like what kind of NFTs you're looking at. These SP NFTs from Camelot though are inherently different than like the typical like trading of monkey pictures per se, just
Sure.
because they what's underpinning them are actual hard LP tokens that can be unwound very easily into their underlying component pieces. So our protocol is able to take certain liberties with these assets and look at them as if they are LP tokens, while still allowing you to distinguish between each one that's deposited in the platform because they are, at the end of the day, NFTs wrapped around these LP tokens.
Oh, okay. So this is not an NFT representation of your like locked. What is Camelot? Camelot has Excalibur tokens, no Grail. So this is not like locked Grail. This is a locked NFT position, similar to what Kronos is doing with their reliquary NFTs. So it's the LP position represented as an NFT, not a locked up governance token.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so I'm just having trouble right now. My MetaMask is not being recognized by like any sites right now. I don't want to like completely uninstall it. Of course, this
Uh,
always happens when you're going to do a product
Of
demo.
course, yeah, yeah. Murphy's Law. Switch to Rabby, man. Actually, I love MetaMask, so no shade to them. But I did switch to Rabby recently, and it has been a very smooth transition. Not a sponsor. I know people might think I am because I've been talking about Rabby so much lately, but it has been really nice.
Gotcha.
Uh,
I think I'm about to get it working. But yeah, please ask another question while I just get this up and running.
sure, yeah, absolutely. So you guys are working on the GLP integration initially first. What's going to come soon after that? So you mentioned the Camelot NFTs. What else?
In general, I would look at our roadmap as a combination of two different paths. We have like external integration where we like do this potentially white glove treatment of working with other protocols and adding extended utility to their ecosystem, while passing along full control and autonomy of those assets in our ecosystem, similar to GMX with GLP. And then we also have more internal roadmap items that allow us to expand the network effects of Dolomite and offer more utility with all the assets that are already on there. So to give you more tangible examples of that, we can look at here we go, now it's working. Um, we're working on adding a new trading feature onto the borrow page, which will allow us to start to flesh out this vision we have for it of becoming a more of like a all-in-one site for portfolio management of your borrowed assets. And the first step for doing that is allowing users to not just repay their positions off with their debt, I'm sorry, with their collateral, but also being able to open up positions and immediately trade the borrowed assets into something else. So what that would allow you to do is uh, basically automate the looping process that users
Sure.
might do manually by like borrowing an asset, taking it off platform, converting it into something else, and then redepositing in order to collateralize your position, which is pretty cumbersome and also like just a pain in the ass to do. Like it just takes a while. And if the
So,
position moves against you,
mhm.
it becomes an even bigger pain to unwind it while the position's also moving against you.
Yes, absolutely. Now, saying all that, especially with those particular features, which I tend to love, gives me a bit of PTSD from another protocol that had those features that I enjoyed quite a lot. One of the recent largest hacks in DeFi, which was Euler. Uh, I guess the first question is: are you going to allow people to donate to the protocol or to their own positions to change their collateral?
No, and this is something we actually posted a thread about like soon after the hack itself, just to compare some of our architectural differences between the two protocols. So if you send funds to our protocol, which we have like a centralized pooling contract, similar to like how GMX pools everything inside of a vault contract, pretty similar for us. If you just send blind funds to it, whether they are a supported asset like ETH or some random coin that's not listed on the platform at all, it's looked at like a donation that's being given to the protocol administrator. Um, so if it's an accident, then of course we can send the funds back if need be. Right now, it would take a multi-sig transaction for it. That's time delayed, but in the future, when the DAO is stood up behind it, the DAO would have to vote to essentially move the funds out of there.
Mhm.
Or on the flip side of that, if it's assets that were donated because like it's an asset supported by the platform, um, yeah, when we look at any of the overages that occur from like the delta between what's given to suppliers versus what's paid by borrowers, um, that delta is given to the administrator as profit for the protocol, similar to what Compound does and what Aave does. I think Aave calls it a reserve factor. We call it an earnings rate, just different colloquial differences in our naming. But yeah, really similar that way. The underlying exchange rates, though, that are used to calculate the difference between like your interest exposed assets versus how we standardize them, similar to what Euler did, is all uh, handled programmatically by the smart contracts themselves, and it's not calculated dynamically using what the balance of the protocol is. And typically, whenever you look at like any of these hacks that revolve around like bad Oracle pricing or like the manipulation of assets, it typically revolves around using balance of or checking the ERC20 balance of a token at a moment in time in order to calculate the price of something. And we purposefully stay away from that in nearly every way possible whenever it comes to listing of assets, and certainly with any protocol related calculations. However, there are certain times where it's unavoidable to use that or to use it. And under such circumstances, those assets need to be non-borrowable, because the opening up of borrowing of those assets is what exposes these kinds of manipulations to happen in the first place.
Yep.
So I don't want to go too much deeper into this, but the point I'm trying to really exemplify here is our team having this very deep background and experience in DeFi, having been around for nearly every single hack, um, including like the super early on ones with like BZX when the first flash loan exploit even happened. We keep our own internal log of these different exploits and understand how they might impact Dolomite, or if we could make the same mistake as these other protocols do. And these are things that we constantly cross-reference before rolling out new assets or new features. And then when it comes to the core protocol itself, the logic that dictates how the money market system works is immutable and we can't change it. The only way that we could potentially change anything is by launching a new protocol entirely and essentially having users migrate over to the new one. But that wouldn't be the same thing as being able to just change logic on hand or on the fly, similar to what Euler was able to do with pieces of their contracts. So that immutability allows protocols that, or like developers or people that can read smart contracts to read it once, understand it once, and then trust it forever. Or similarly, if an auditor wants to come in and look at our core system, they can do that, and it's the same system that other auditors would have looked at that point, and
Hmm.
they can once again make that same assumption, and it carries forward essentially forever.
Okay, wait. So I am a mixed but mostly big fan of immutable contracts. Are you guys suggesting that most of your contract is immutable, or which parts of your smart contracts are immutable?
So if I was like if my video were on right now, I usually have like a demonstration I do with my hands, but we have a
Sure.
core infrastructure layer at the base layer. So
Right.
think of that as like layer 0.
Mhm.
Those smart contracts are immutable. There are parameters that can be changed, of course, for risk, and
Right.
managing risk of the protocol, or introducing like new user experience bumps that like would make things easier to use or better for the users. But the primitives of like how the money market system works with regards to like depositing, withdrawing, trading, borrowing, liquidating, etc., that core logic is unchangeable. The calculation of exchange rates, for example, that's unchangeable. Introducing a new interest model, that can change. Or changing what the minimum collateralization ratio might be for certain
Mhm.
assets, like things
Right.
like that can change. Stuff that you'd expect.
Mhm.
So certain parameters are changeable, but the logic, the math, that kind of stuff can't change. And then the other piece to our infrastructure is it's extremely modular by design. And this is what allows us to, what we believe, have a strong degree of staying power in the industry with this one protocol, as opposed to like going rogue for 6 months and like working on version 2, because
Yeah.
everyone says that version 2 is going to fix all the problems with version 1. Rather, we have this core layer that we roll out that allows other pieces to stand up on top of it and adjacent to one another, but not in conflict with one another. And those pieces allow us to have um, a more succinct upgrade path and allows us to iterate in the protocol uh, in a quicker and more safe manner than working on new versions entirely or changing core logic all the time. So the only places where we use upgradable contracts or contracts who like the actual core logic can change are like the vaults that are used for isolation mode. Like in particular, the only place we use this right now is for GLP. That's just because those vaults heavily depend on all the logic, the understanding, and the interactions with GMX. It put our system at a really deep risk. So we need to be able to flex if need be, if their protocol changes. So there's a certain degree of like a calculative risk or trade-off happening here of places where we don't think we'll never ever need to change anything or we don't want to ever change anything. We assert that and make the contracts immutable. But then certain places where things are potentially outside of our control, or if another team needs to change something, we allow us to introduce this changing of logic if need be. So there's a very careful trade-off happening here under only very specific scenarios.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. I'm totally into it. I mean, so I guess the contemporary example of this is like solidly forks. Solidly forks, if they're actual genuine solidly forks, have this immutable contract. So it effectively means the LP mechanisms are all roughly the same and not exploitable unless Solidly itself is exploitable, which is a pretty sound structured contract. But the tokenomics and the like little tiny differences, those are all changeable and different from protocol to protocol. Is that like a semi similar analogy?
Yeah, I'd say it's a similar analogy, but like, because like at the end of the day, like Adam and I are engineers, like we'll always look
Right.
at those kind of questions with a bit of nuance to it, and
Sure.
we wouldn't just necessarily say it's the same thing. But there is something to be said for like drawing analogies like this to make them more relatable for like other teams and other people in the community to really understand how they work.
Okay, well, we have like roughly half an hour, and I know there's so much more to be shown. So I want you to just give me the walkthrough. I'm already super into
Excellent.
it.
So, yeah, let's talk about the capital efficiency side of the system because that's something that's really hard to talk about without actually seeing it firsthand. So, as mentioned at the start of the call here, we do offer full support for GMX's GLP token, and this is the raw asset itself that sits in your wallet normally, and you interact with GMX from your wallet. Then, um, that you now have full control over it within our system. So when you click on the asset awards button over here, which is uniquely available just for this one row because this is the only asset so far that has its own reward system tied into the system, what you'll first notice is that the interface here looks eerily similar to GMX's for
GMX's,
claiming and
yeah.
compounding your
Mhm.
rewards. And this was done purposefully to really make this experience feel native to GMX users and those users that want to migrate their assets into our system. But what you might notice though is the assets I have on the platform here right now. If I go open up GMX's site right now, you won't see the same rewards and the same numbers in here because the GLP tokens that are deposited in the system that are accruing these rewards right now are deposited into a Dolomite specific proxy vault that your wallet controls and just your wallet alone. So it's essentially a conduit into our system. But what you might notice in the top row over here is that there's a number which is 1,197. It's the total GLP sitting in the vault. And this is the total amount that I have deposited that's earning rewards right now, which is all the percent APR. If ESGMX rewards were turned on for GLP, you would earn them on the total balance there. You can also take, for example, some or all the GLP you have, and if you're holding ESGMX, you can vest ESGMX into GMX using your GLP tokens then. And while this is going on, there's a clear delineation between what you do with these hard assets, the GLP sitting in the vault, what you're able to do with your GLP virtual balance in the system at the same time. So my virtual balance for GLP right now is 245, it says right here. And when you walk over to the borrow page and look at some of the positions I have open, you'll see I have 950 sitting in this position right here. I have 1.75 GLP sitting in this position right here. But the really neat thing though is that you have these assets scattered across the platform doing different things used within different positions. But then what you choose to do with your assets when it comes to the GMX rewards ecosystem is a clear layer of abstraction or difference essentially. And this is what capital efficiency in our mind looks like. It's this virtualization that happens where your collateral that's deposited in the platform, you could do with it as you see fit. But then the assets themselves that might be able to interact natively with the GMX ecosystem, you're able to do that with as much flexibility as you'd like without worrying about, your GLP sitting in a borrow position, for example, and now you can't earn yield on it. Or now you can't use it for vesting ESGMX into GMX.
Okay, so what is the? Uh, I'm following you for the most part, but one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is up until this point, what is the major difference between doing this on Dolomite and doing this on GMX's native site?
So we wanted to offer like a one-to-one experience on it. So like a
Okay,
lot of the stuff that you can see and do here on Dolomite is the exact same stuff you can do on GMX. But the big difference is that now you can leverage your GLP in order to increase your exposure to it. You can borrow against it if you want to go free up capital and go yield farm elsewhere, or you can go ahead and use it as collateral to hedge your exposure completely. The decision is really up to you. So we extend GLP's functionality to offer all of this new borrow lend capabilities with it, while still having the same level of control and autonomy that you would have as if it were sitting in your wallet. And that's something really important that users need to um, realize with our platform is it's an extension of functionality. It's a cooperation with their protocol to offer something new that they couldn't do elsewhere.
got it. So basically, it's meant to feel as if you're interacting with GMX natively, with the additional level or additional features of being able to rehypothecate it or borrow against it or leverage it.
Exactly.
Got it. Love
Exactly.
it. Now, one of the major ways that leverage has been demanded, at least from this community, has been with the ability. So we've seen a lot of leverage on GLP. I guess I'll preface it with that. And a lot of this leverage is you have your GLP, you borrow stables against it, and then you effectively short those stables for the index that is GLP. 50% stables roughly, and then roughly half of the remaining being Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I guess you could say like Link and Uni or whatever it is. And that forces you into a long position or a leveraged long position on the underlying index. Some people want to have like a rather neutral position where you could borrow that index, right? Borrow 50% stables, borrow whatever the percentile in ETH is, borrow whatever the percentile in Bitcoin is, and then leverage that up. And I've heard that might be possible for the first time on your protocol. Now, was this true or was I
Yeah,
mistaken?
absolutely. So, um, I just went over back to the borrow page. One of the positions I actually have open is considered to be delta neutral. And essentially, when I open this position up, I borrow the delta or the component assets of
Mhm.
WBTC and ETH. Obviously, the dollar amount here you see is super low. It was meant to be more of a example than it was like me just putting like every dollar I have on the line for it, for example. But
Sure.
regardless, though, we borrow the component assets of ETH and WBTC, then withdrew them from the platform to sell them back to USDC, and then deposited the USDC back in the position to recollateralize it, all while using GLP as part of the marking of the value of the position for obtaining this hedge. So what this means is
So you shorted
the
you shorted the long exposure that you have in GLP, and then
exactly,
with your short you recollateralized to reduce your liquidation risk.
exactly. So the position I have here doesn't really fluctuate much in dollar value, all while accumulating those ETH rewards and percent
Right.
APR that comes along with holding GLP.
That's exciting. Now, of course, you're still exposed to the trader P&L on GMX. That's one thing that's
Of
nearly
course.
impossible to get rid of. However, some other protocols have attempted to solve that by counter trading traders on GMX. So they're effectively counter trading the counterparty vault in order to offer a more neutralized position. Have you guys considered that, or is that just a feature that you feel is not in your wheelhouse and not necessarily something that you feel is part of the product you want to offer?
So far, like we look at Dolomite as more of a blank canvas, where like this position that you see here was manually crafted and opened by
Mhm.
myself. And when you use our platform, we don't restrict you on how you want or how you'd like to use it. So that would mean in this position, if you want to, you can put your GLP up as collateral, and you can go ahead and account for open interest skew if you'd like by going long or short, depending on if the net traders are long or short on the platform on GMX themselves. So you have the full ability to control, like I said, whether you want to go delta neutral on just price or
Mhm.
incorporate open interest skew into that as well. The decision's up to you. Now down the line, we might introduce some like more structured vaults that take advantage of our system to offer these strategies with more efficiency, or do it in a pre-built way so it's more of a set and forget. But yeah, one of the key things when it comes to hedging is that there is no one size fits all. Like there's always a trade-off that you're
Right.
taking where you're either reducing your APR you earn from the GLP while in order to hedge more, or on the flip side of that, you're capturing more APR while exposing yourself to more risk because you're not hedging too much.
Right.
Um, so this process is very imperfect. So the idea that you could be a whale and carve out your own strategy on our platform is really powerful. Because a lot of small users don't mind the idea of like experimenting with different vaults that takes certain financial assumptions. But if you're a large user with hundreds of thousands of dollars at risk, a lot like oftentimes we've seen that like this one size fits all approach doesn't necessarily work for large users, um, or users that have a lot of skin in the game and want to be able to take uh, some more hands-on approach to like how they might take it like or handle risk for that kind of scenario. So once again, the idea here is that we have a product that can really serve everyone. Right now, we're taking this more uh, blank canvas approach of you can do it as you see fit, how you want to. And down the line, it's easy enough for us to build vaults on top of this that run automated strategies for you that take certain assumptions. And if the users of these vaults are okay with those assumptions, they can just go ahead and deposit it in there and set it and forget it.
I love the idea of that. Absolutely. And this is also giving me sort of a DeFi saver instead up kind of vibe where you can create your own strategies, right? Now, with that in mind, are you guys planning to offer things like or have functionality similar to DeFi Saver where you have recipes so people can share their strategies effectively and people can open those strategies or mimic those strategies without having to recraft them step by step?
So we haven't like fleshed out a vision for the platform in that specific regard yet. Because of the platform's modularity, like this is always a conversation we could open back up 6 months, a year from now, for example, and decide to allow people to share strategies like this. But I actually do love the idea that you brought up InstaDApp and DeFi Saver for a moment because there's certain features that those platforms offer that I think are sorely needed on a core money market level that aren't offered. Like the idea that you have a position open on Aave right now, for example, and if you run close to getting liquidated, the only thing you can really do is just manually sign in with your wallet and go ahead and save your position before you get liquidated.
Yes.
Stinks. So there's a lot of features that are really missing on the money market level when it comes to like decentralized stop loss, take profit, rebalancing your position, monitoring interest rate changes, other things like that that are sorely needed. And then also the execution for those trades, whether it's done with a market order, a limit order, a TWAP into it, a TWAP out of it. All these different things are important considerations. And taking a step back for a moment, one of the things I have not mentioned yet is that we're a part of the Chainlink Build program. And one of the things that we're working with them behind closed doors are the tools and primitives needed in order to offer these features I'm talking about right now. So this is why we wanted to work with Chainlink on the build program is because these features, in order to execute them in a decentralized way, don't really exist all too well at the moment, at least not without the same level of robustness and resiliency that the Chainlink network offers. So we're working closely with them in order to, like I said, introduce the primitives necessary so we can start to roll out these features over time.
That sounds bigger than you're leading on. But I'll move on to the next question. I am interested in the additional features. I love the fact that you guys have this incredibly robust use case for GLP, but you've sort of alluded to the fact that you're much more than just this sort of GLP aggregation layer. What else? Like, show us some of the other features that you have on this protocol.
Sure. So in terms of like a technical proof of concept, I did mention the idea that we can offer trading on the platform. And trading for right now is not the best experience if you're a large trader right now, because for one, it's only ETH and USDC, and the liquidity available on here is pretty sparse. So you wouldn't be able to execute like a $10,000 trade without encountering some pretty significant slippage that no one should want to encounter at the moment.
Right.
So I'm just showing you right here, a $10,000 trade already has 1.4%. So that's not good. But the thing that's being showcased here, really interestingly, is this idea of virtual liquidity being used for executing these trades. So when you hover your mouse over the pool APR that exists right now, what you might notice is that there's two different yield amounts being aggregated together for you at the same time. So when you pool your assets in our system, you're earning both lending yield and pooling yield at the exact same time.
Mm.
And where this gets super interesting down the line is as we take the equity tokens that exist for these pools and list them on the platform, you'll be able to borrow them in order to short the impermanent loss of these pools, while also borrowing against them in order to unlock that dormant equity you have in these very valid positions.
Hold on,
So
wait.
you can,
You said something that's really interesting. Are you saying that
okay,
you can borrow the LP token or borrow the position representing an LP token?
exactly. You can borrow the
So
LP token itself.
so that means you're effectively neutral on the LP. Can you then also get rewards? Because if you're neutral on the LP, you're also neutral on the fees. So if fees are accruing intrinsically, well, tough luck for you. You don't get any of those because you borrowed the token. You have to give it back later. But can you generate interest on that LP in a neutral way?
Yeah, one of the things you could do is actually hedge against the position or the price performance of the LP token.
Right. So
Um,
have the position open somewhere else, and then or and borrow and short it on the platform.
yeah, I mean, what you could do, for example, is borrow the LP token, break it down, and like go put the assets into another platform and actually go long or short the performance of one LP token versus another. Like
Right.
right now, for example, the yield being earned on our pooling is, as you see here, 1.4%. That's not competitive compared to like what Sushi Swap generates right now at Arbitrum for the ETH-USDC pair.
Mm-hmm.
So what you could actually do is move your assets out of Dolomite, essentially short the performance of it, and go along the performance of Sushi. And what that would do for Dolomite is actually raise the rates up. So they can reach more of a market equilibrium from users that are borrowing these assets then. So there's, once again, going back to this blank canvas approach, the users that really are like financially savvy, there is so much alpha to unlock as the network effects of Dolomite grows further and further. And then we could take these primitives we have in place to introduce simplified strategies for users that want to run these things that don't have the know-how or don't have the time to constantly monitor or nurse these positions.
No, man, keep it super complicated. That we need that edge. The more complicated the protocol, the better the APRs are for a longer time. I agree, though. There's certainly something to be said about making a more user friendly or vault simplified strategy. But I'm really interested in this particular feature because I think Gamma Swap is trying to do this, and good for them. I think they'll probably pull it off to some extent. And I have theorized effectively the same thing. Like if you could just borrow an LP token and then stake the LP token there, you could be neutral on it while getting some sort of yield. But I also like this idea of shorting an LP token, or borrowing an LP token, breaking it down, and then farming it somewhere else. So can you do that? Is that currently a feature you can do, or is that something that's up and coming?
That's something that's actually up and coming, so it's not
Okay.
available at the moment. There's certain things from a risk perspective we need to introduce on for the protocol to be able to handle that.
Hmm.
So we can handle really every edge case. So that's something that we won't do. We won't compromise any of those security related features just to get something new out that we think could be good for product market fit or be good for notoriety.
So
We won't rush things from that perspective.
absolutely. When I was conceptualizing this or a similar structure, the one of the roadblocks that I kept running into was how do you incentivize people to lend LPs if they could get more from staking it somewhere else? So now you're talking about these. I'm going to keep calling them financialized NFTs, but I think you called them like equity NFTs. Uh, are those already incentivized? Or I guess the question to you is the same that was to me. How do you incentivize people to lend their LP positions?
So certain reward positions, like the Camelot ones, like those assets won't be borrowable because it introduces too much risk for the protocol to handle because there's like this extra layer that gets added onto it. But if we're looking at just the LP token itself, like that's the thing we want to be borrowable.
Hmm.
Um, and there's certain reasons to potentially like work with an asset in Dolomite for like to earn the boosted yield versus to just use the token itself, like the vanilla version of it. And it mainly relates to how the protocol handles risk from an isolation perspective. So if you're working with the like state Camelot equity NFT, for example, there's certain like restrictions we have to put in place that'll disallow you from using it in certain ways because it's in isolation mode for the platform.
Sure.
But then if you're working with the raw token itself, there's more liberties you could take with it. So looking at, for example, the idea of borrowing the LP token, breaking it down, then going long and permanent loss, just as an example. Let's say that you're using ETH/USDC as the example trade for this. So using the ETH/USDC LP token, break down the LP token, you're now holding ETH and USDC. So what we're looking to do with expanding the network effects of Dolomite is allowing you to take that USDC and you can put it into, for example, JUSDC, and then once we list JUSDC on the platform, you can actually use JUSDC to recollateralize your position. So with these different assets being combined together in interesting ways, when you work with the more vanilla components, there's more flexibility with what you can do with them on the platform, and that flexibility leads to you being able to position yourself further along the risk curve and capture more yield then. So JUSDC, just as an example,
Hmm.
earns a lot more yield than just ordinary USDC does.
Right.
So much so that you could put yourself into a position where you're actually going to get paid to go long in permanent loss because even the borrow rate that you're paying on the LP tokens might be too low compared to what you can earn from, like I said, positioning yourselves a bit further along on that risk spectrum. And that level of flexibility with our sandbox is one of the reasons why our solution is so different from something like Gamma Swap or other things. Like Gamma Swap is it's a bit more of a structured product, and they take certain harsher stances with their architecture, which really positions it as a platform to just like go log into your terminal, go long or short and permanent loss, or
Right.
they call it volatility, and
Hmm.
be done with it. But with our platform and this carve out your own model or carve out your own strategy
Right.
sort of model that you can run, yeah, you can go ahead and do that, and we can build an interface where you can go long or short volatility pretty simply. But if you want to go run the strategy yourself and like do some wacky shit like that,
Yeah.
you can go ahead and do it. We're not going to stop you.
So
It's
that.
almost like
Go ahead.
I was gonna say. I think it's almost like we're, the way we see it, we're just a layer below that, and
Yeah.
theoretically, someone could come along and build some sort of specialized interface on top of Dolomite's protocol. There's no secret sauce that we're hiding that we only have access to. If we were to build some of these more interesting use case specific interfaces, it would just almost be like we are just another integrator. Someone else should come in and do something similar, and that's really what we're trying to do. We have strong documentation on our tech, and we would love to be able to just open the door and let people build on top of Dolomite, and for Dolomite to literally just be that blank canvas base layer below it that powers a huge range of strategies.
So yeah, I love this idea. So it seems as if you're not trying to attract people to deposit their LPs so that they can be, borrowed and leveraged and utilized in whatever way. You're saying that you're building a platform where people can do that if they want to do that. So you're just building a tool, and you're not saying that you want to be the impermanent loss neutralization platform in DeFi. You're just saying you're going to be a tool where people can do that if they want to, and then if protocols want to specifically work on impermanent loss neutralization, then they could build on top of you guys. Is that roughly an accurate characterization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it works well for like large LP token holders that don't do much with those tokens because rewards have run dry or it's not worth like the getting the rewards. Like in the sushi swap example, like a lot of the LPs right now just don't have a strong use case for staking them because the rewards are so minimal for the sushi rewards. But then you also have this completely different use case of if Gamma Swap wanted to in the future, like they actually could start to build some of their infrastructure using like a Dolomite backend for it, this Dolomite smart contracts. It might be able to extend some of its own functionality with um, different capabilities that they don't necessarily have access to, or with deeper amounts of leverage or other capabilities, depending on like where our protocol goes from here.
Yeah, yeah. Just thinking through this. Cool. I love it. Yeah. So effectively, you're saying that if someone was in a sushi swap position and they were earning like, I don't know, 1.5% in sushi per year on top of their intrinsic yield of, who knows, 2%, they might say, well, I don't need that 1.5%. I would rather leverage my LP in some meaningful way, or go and borrow some USDC and farm that to boost my yield rather than rely on these sushi emissions. Is that
Exactly.
got it? Okay, love that. Love that. Definitely makes sense to me. They're long on the LP. They want that exposure, but the sushi emissions just aren't that great, and this allows them a chance to leverage that, or use it as collateral, or add to a collateralized position already. So maybe just like increase their health factor. Uh, cool. I love
Yeah.
it. All right, what else do you guys got?
um,
I've been enjoying this so far. This is a really cool tool.
I really appreciate you saying that. So, like, looking at toward the future, then. So, like, right now, we already give this example of how the platform like isn't in a good position at the moment for trading, but we're looking to expand that soon. So, one of the features that we're working on for this quarter to release is the ability to trade in and out of positions to automate that looping process. We already touched on that, and it's pretty clear how that's going to be a valuable feature for the borrow page over here for a couple of reasons. One is getting access to efficiency, so you don't need to like manually do this looping process and pulling funds off platform and whatnot. Um, and then the other thing that we'll be able to do is actually extend this functionality over to the trade page so that users can trade on margin ETH, USDC, or other tokens really easily from the platform. And unfortunately, I can't show this easily because, you know what, I think I can change to this test network. You can see it then. So one of the features that Dolomite has native access to is something called pair trading. And for example, we actually already support this on our test network, and I've been doing this pretty frequently for the past 6 months. You actually can go long or short different assets using any other asset as collateral. So what that would mean is if you go over to the margin tab over here, you actually can go long ETH and short WBTC, which essentially means playing the ratio. And some users are far better at trading ratios than they are actually trading against like the US dollar because they think that
Right.
some trades are super easy if you just trade it against ETH or trade it against WBTC. But our platform's non-restrictive in which assets you want to trade one against the other. Like you can go, unfortunately on our test network, we just have these 5 assets on here.
Mhm.
But as we list more and more, like if we list GMX, then list gains, you can literally go long GMX and short gains if you think one's better than the other and just trade the ratio on that. The permutation that is enabled by this is pretty extensive, where it's literally any asset against any asset. Super efficient. There's no US dollar denominated in the middle of it. Rather, you're just paying funding fees or interest really because you're just borrowing the hard asset. You're borrowing one asset, then earning on the other one then. So if you want to do this trade, for example, of going long ETH and short WBTC, then what it looks like is you are borrowing WBTC, so you pay an interest rate on it, and the ETH you're holding, you're getting paid to hold then. So the breakdown does
S-
show you what the net interest rate looks like,
Right.
but the end outcome is extremely interesting for what's possible for so many different use cases. And we've already been talking to a couple of users that are pretty big into pair trading that don't have a good venue for accessing some of these more unique postures that they could potentially tap into with it. So after we release this trading feature, we're looking to expand the number of coins we have listed on the platform to get into more altcoins, and that would allow users to start to run these trades then with some pretty wacky permutations then that we're really excited by.
So how do you plan? So this is really cool, but one of the issues is you don't have liquidity. How do you plan on bringing in liquidity or incentivizing liquidity in a meaningful way that would make this a viable option for at scale?
So we're looking to initially work with a DEX aggregator. We're probably going to use at least two or three of them,
Sure.
so that in case one goes down, there's always functionality on the site. Just swap in one for the other. And also, we can just put the rates up against each other. So similar to like what
Euler
DeFi
did.
Llama
Yeah.
does, yeah, with their swap aggregator, while having a
Mhm.
meta one built into our own system essentially. So that will not require like really much of any liquidity for us. Then all that really is required are depositors that are keeping assets idle on the platform, so other users can borrow them. That's a much shorter order compared to like accumulating trading liquidity.
Right.
So our plan longer term then is once we accumulate enough organic taker volume on the platform, it's a lot easier for us to work with Falcon X, who's one of our initial backers on the platform,
Hmm.
or potentially a different market maker, and say, hey, we're currently seeing $10 million in trade volume per day on these different assets. Right now, all that trading fees and liquidity is going to other venues. And if you put that liquidity on our platform, this is what we can guarantee you in terms of trade volume per day. It becomes a much easier negotiating point and point of exemplification for them to want to put their assets on the platform.
Right.
And then that would be our first step of liquidity. When you mix that with other users that have been organically using the site and they see what the rates would be themselves based upon the current demanding usage, they can also add to that liquidity as well, and that becomes like the uh, activation of a flywheel essentially for us spawning our own decks.
This is a good vision. But so let's back up before we get too far down the roadmap. When you said there are funding fees, and then you sort of backed up and said that it's more like you're paying interest on a debt position. Uh, I am a huge fan of funding arbitrage, but it seems like you won't be able to do funding arbitrage on your platform because rather you'll always be paying to go short on some asset because you're paying an interest rate rather than a funding fee. So the funding, like, it's never going to be positive. Is this like a correct assumption, or is there a case where you could open a position and be making net positive interest on that position?
It's possible, but not in the traditional sense of like funding arbitrage that you see with like futures platforms.
Right.
Because you're actually borrowing the hard assets. If one asset is just super cheap to borrow because no one's borrowing it, um, but the other asset earns good yield, like USDC, for example, or
Mhm.
ETH because of ETH staking, and it's very easy to run a position like that because you would be paying next to very little interest on the asset you're shorting, and
Right.
then earning more on the asset you're holding then for the position.
Okay. So in this BTC ETH position, let's just say it for whatever reason cost 1% to borrow wrap Bitcoin, and then again because of ETH staking, the deposit rate is something like 2.5%. Does that mean you're net positive 1.5%?
Yeah, so it would the interest rate would either cancel each other out to potentially push you positive where you're earning, or on the flip side where our system looks at negative interest rates like you're paying them, positives if you're earning them.
Sure. Okay.
So it's a bit different that way than what you see from a futures platform. But putting that aside, then yeah, if one is positive, one's negative. If the positive one's over the negative one, then you're earning, and then flip side, you'd be paying on the situation where it's more negative than positive.
Okay. Cool. Really interesting. Okay, so I think I saw someone typing in the chat that I don't know if they never finished their comment. Um, all right, so you have this trading mechanism, you have this pretty robust money market. You mentioned something really interesting early on that scared me, which was that you had the potential to host some ridiculous amount of assets on your money market. Now, that immediately makes me think, oh God, what if they put some low market cap collateral on there and you see one of these very common money market exploits? How are you preventing that? And why is it the case that having all of these different types of collateral is not exposing you to these sort of fundamental risks that we've seen time and time again?
Yeah, so to be clear, like we don't think that we've magically solved the issue of being able to like list an unlimited number of tokens with unlimited amounts of collateral, and then you can go ahead and do those sorts of things without any financial risk. With our platform, we're able to be very expressive with each asset we list in terms of restrictions. So that would mean potentially putting borrow caps, supply caps in place,
Sure.
changing minimum collateralization ratios and whatnot. So even though we could offer these cool features, like for low cap altcoins that don't have good oracles, we wouldn't be able to list them at all. But if they have an oracle but not deep enough liquidity, we'd have to put restrictions in place. So not everyone would be able to tap into these features if one whale decides to use up all the utilization for those assets then. So there are some restrictions in place with that,
Got it.
but it's not something we're shy about, and I think it's something that like as liquidity improves over time, or if the usage of our platform increases sufficiently, we can be the ones that seed that extra liquidity so that users can trade that asset more than what would have been possible beforehand.
Love it. Got it. So you have the capacity to host a lot of assets. That doesn't mean that you're going to host a lot of assets, and especially doesn't mean that you're going to host all these assets with like high LTVs and just like degen leverage capabilities, and expose yourself to the risks that we've already mentioned. You have the ability to list them. Got it. All right. Cool. I
I
love
think
to
the other
hear it.
thing too, if it's slightly different perspective is that you normally think of it in terms of just listing more different coins, sort of like low cap, altcoins. But even listing something like LP tokens is another consideration there, because that is still, we're talking about the limitations of other lending platforms being, only able to cap it at 30 to 60 assets. Listing something like an LP token is another one of those assets that that would have to be a consideration. But for Dolomite, the ability to list a large number of assets includes that. So we're not always just looking at listing some new random altcoin, but being able to enable these strategies with something that is very liquid, something that is very well used, but is not traditionally a collateral asset. That is often the way we're looking at it, and the perspective we're looking at it from when it comes to being able to list a lot more.
Yeah, that's what gets me the most excited, because composability is king in DeFi, and if you're increasing composability amongst like exotic assets or positions, then you're increasing leverage, but you're also increasing the value or capital efficiency of anyone's given portfolio.
Yeah, exactly. I think you just nailed it by saying it that way.
Well, you guys have 4 more minutes, and I want to know, like, what do you want people to get out of this? Like, when people look at Dolomite and think about Dolomite, what do you want them to think, and what do you want to be in their head? Like, how do you want people to conceptualize Dolomite's use case, and the value that it brings to the Arbitrum network?
That's the DeFi saver.
I think looking at us as a very collaborative and innovative protocol would be like the two key adjectives. We're not shy about working with other teams, especially if they have something cool that they can offer in working with us, or even if there's certain crossover where they might be looked at as a competitor. Like we're still not afraid to work with them. So we're key to put ourselves out there, and some of these features that we offer today and the ones that we'll be able to offer tomorrow, we think put us into a good spot to be an innovator within the space, to offer extended use or utility where previously wasn't possible before, or wasn't efficient enough to do it beforehand. So our platform is going to naturally change or evolve quite a bit over time as these features come out, network effects expand, and so on. But I would encourage the community to watch what we're releasing, visit the platform every now and then to see what might have changed over time, to see what new features are out there, what new assets might be on there for you to potentially experiment with, and give it a try. I think that overall, like, we have built something very complex, and thinking around like user experience and getting people to understand the product and fully take advantage of it is really tough to represent. So we're constantly gathering feedback. We're constantly refining our user experience and our model, and looking at ways that we can make things run more efficiently in the future, and make sure that discoverability of features and users being able to actually utilize them is important.
Final question. To my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, you guys don't have a token yet. Is that correct or incorrect?
That is correct.
All right. So, tis the season. Will there be an airdrop for users of your protocol, early users of your protocol? And if not, how will you ever launch a token? I guess is the first part of the question. If so, will there be an airdrop for users of the protocol?
Well, looking at like overall like the way that we architected our platform, the fact that like those core contracts are immutable, but it requires governance in order to change parameters for managing and handling risk. I think that sets it up to be in a good position to eventually have a fully on-chain DAO. DAOs are usually governed by tokens, but they could be potentially governed by other things. We're not naive to the industry and know that like a popular way to get a token out there initially is to do some kind of airdrop. But at the moment, we don't really have any set plans for how we do any kind of token distribution because we don't have a token conceptualized right now. Really, we're just focused on extending the current platform's functionality. And eventually, if there's an opportunity for doing that, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But really just focused on, like I said, right now, building out the platform.
Which is a much more noble endeavor than just trying to farm engagement through airdrop promises. So I appreciate that answer. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for joining. This was way more informative and way more expansive than I thought it was going to be. I knew you guys were integrating with GLP. I think everyone sort of knows that. I wasn't aware that you were building this sort of very robust tool that sort of competes with your DeFi savers, competes with your Instadaps, competes with your Oilers, even, and then even adds additional functionality with integrations with LPs and other things like that. So this was really insightful. Thank you so much for joining. And let's see, there is one more question, and I think we have one more minute. It says, I'm a new user with composable assets. Top 2 things to do on Dolomite.
So assuming those assets are listed on the platform for you to go ahead and take advantage of them, go borrow against them by arbitrage our low borrow rates. Some people have complained that the supply side rates aren't good enough, but our distribution strategy is heavily geared towards keeping borrow rates cheap so that you can go ahead and utilize the platform, then go yield farm elsewhere, go lever up on Dolomite, go hedge your position. These are all things that are inherently possible because borrow rates are purposefully kept cheap for right now. So take advantage of that, and if you unlock new strategies or think there are things you want to share or ideate, join our Discord. We have a strategies channel where people are starting to pick up usage on there and talk about things that they're doing on the platform. And if those things become prominent enough, or you think there's new tools we can release to make the platform better or make you run the strategy more easily, let us know and we'll build it.
Love to hear it. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining, and everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
It was awesome being on here.
Appreciate it. And join the Discord. So we'll get a link out there for everyone. And there's that. All right, I got to hop up to another meeting, but this was a pleasure.
All right, likewise.
Have a good one.
Bye, guys.
See ya.